wow. Um, as I think maybe women tend to do, I'd like to open with an apology. I am not a thinker. I'm not an academic. I can't give you the sort of analysis that Tomer just did. I actually not even sure that the issues that you're dealing with is something that I deal with on a regular basis. But I do have one or two thoughts that I would like to share with you today, and hoping it would resonate with the things you're dealing with. So, if I'm not a thinker or an academic, whatever. I'm an activist. I'm an activist in the field of religious freedom here in Israel. I'm an Orthodox Jew, an observant Jew. I work for the conservative movement, for the Masorti movement in Israel. But I grew up and I'm raising my children in an Orthodox family. And I think, it matters and it doesn't matter. A lot of us who are united in the struggle for religious pluralism and religious freedom in Israel come from different backgrounds, but share the same goals. After many, many years of working, not many, but many years of working from the funding chair, from the funding seat, I've made a transition and I now work in the field. And the thing I do in the conservative movement here in Israel is that I run an organization that sits within the conservative. We are a Knesset Watch. We watch the Israeli parliament, and we want to monitor everything that they do that is connected to the situation of religion and state here in Israel. And the whole concept of transparency and accountability and opening our eyes to what our public elected officials are doing is something that is very young and new to the Israeli society and to our developing, growing democratic culture. I want to think of it as a developing one and that is not shriveling. And it's not that things were hidden from us so much. A few things were hidden, but the information was existing somewhere. It's just that it wasn't accessible to the public, and it definitely was not analyzed and looked at through an agenda perspective. And we have an agenda. Our agenda, and we're sitting here in an organization that's connected to the Reform movement, the Israel Religion Action Center of the Reform movement in Israel actually owns the best motto for our struggle. And that is the very simple idea, which is not so simple here in Israel, not for politicians and actually not for Israelis, that there is more than one way to be Jewish. And if this is our vision, that there is more than one way to be Jewish, when I want to take it to court, I ask my friends from the Israel Religious Action Center to represent me. When I want to take it to Facebook, I ask my friends from Israel Chofshit, Be Free Israel, to take me to Facebook. When I want to do it at the Knesset, I come to us, or I hope that we can be the address to open an eye and shed some light on what our politicians are doing and not doing to change or to promote this idea that there is more than one way to be Jewish. Because we can do it at home, and we can do it in the congregations and synagogues that we choose to go to. But we also, in a state that does not separate synagogue and state, we also need to do it from the parliament and by the parliament for the people. So that's the business I'm involved in. Now, when Ruchama invited me today, she asked, do you think religion can find a way to immune itself or to deal with not being harmful and maybe even violent towards someone? And I answered you, Ruchama, and this is a thought that I would like to share with you from my perspective, where religion and political power live together. Can it not be? Is it inherent to any religion to have a power structure? And to be hurting someone. Do we know? I do not. My master's is in social anthropology, but I don't know much about world religion. Can we come up with, name one religion? Can we name 5 religions that are not inherently, I don't know what the word is, what? Have a hierarchy, have a power base, are putting someone is number 1 and someone is number 2. Is it something that is inherent to religion? The way I view it in Israel 2017, what?
Patriarch.
Patriarch, and this is where I'm going. The way I view it in Israel 2017 is that definitely not here, okay? Definitely not in this country, definitely not in this city, definitely not in the building of the Knesset with 120 members. I don't know of an option that it doesn't hurt someone. And that someone is always women. And that is the second thing I've come here to say. One is that I think it's inherent to religion, and I say this as a religious person. There is always number 1 and number 2. And the second is that number 2 is always women. And that the business of control and power and the power base is always gender-built, always gender-based, and is always trying to control women's bodies, women's sexuality, women's rights, women's presence in the public sphere, women's presence at home. And that's kind of depressing for me to say that out loud to the microphone and to admit it to myself and to admit it in front of you. And I live with it, you know, I live in it. I raised a daughter, I raised 2 sons. I was raised into that power structure. But I want to be aware of it, and I wanted to guide my work, and I wanted to guide my personal life. I'm thinking across the board of all the struggles that we're involved with today, all the issues that we're trying to promote vis-a-vis our politicians, or through the Supreme Court, because sometimes not a lot can be done in the Israeli parliament, and it needs to go to the Supreme Court. And I can think of one issue out of all of the issues that we're dealing with that has nothing to do with gender, or not directly influenced or managed or connected to gender issues. And that is the question of Shabbat, the Sabbath, Shabbat in the public sphere here in Israel. It's a big issue for the Israeli society. It's being dealt with by the Knesset, by the court, by the people, by the convenience stores, by the public transportation that exists or doesn't exist. It's a big issue. That's the only one that is slightly or totally not connected to gender. Every single issue, every other issue that we're dealing with has a bearing for women, has a bearing for gay people, has everything to do with gender and with power. And I want to give one example. It's a tiny example, but I think it embodies the power structure and the way the connection between synagogue and state touches women. And pun intended, really touches women. So we monitor. Our business is to monitor. And when we monitor, we sit on the Knesset website and we try to see what kind of bills are being introduced, and do they have a meaning, or do they have a context that we need to be aware of. And my staff regularly looks into the bills are online. The Knesset puts all the bills online, the language is there, the names of the politicians, it's all kosher, out in the open. So at the end of the winter Knesset session, Erev Pesach, right before Passover, one of my staff members sends me a link to a new bill and says, are we interested in this? Is this connected to our work? And I click and open the bill, and it is a really, really al panav, face value, it's a really nice bill. It really sees women. And it's submitted by an MK who is a member of the Jewish Home Party, which is a national religious party, but signed by another 18 members of Knesset from all the parties, men and women, right and left, coalition and opposition. And the bill says, if a woman has been refused a get, if she is trapped in, a get is a Jewish divorce. If she's trapped in a marriage that she cannot get out of, and we'll talk about this for 1 second just to explain, then the state, and this is the bill, the state will pay for preservation of her fertility and for the process of extracting her eggs and freezing them until the time she receives the get from her husband, the divorce from her husband. That is such a compassionate suggestion. Bezalel Smotrich, member of Knesset, is so nice of him to think of women's fertility and their ability to bring children into this world when they are trapped in a marriage that they cannot get out of. Now, 2 minutes on halacha, on Jewish law. To undo a Jewish marriage, only the husband can grant his wife a divorce. He has to do so willingly. If we are suspicious, if we have reason to believe that he gave the get, the divorce, G-E-T-T or G-E-T, Gimel Tet, but he was coerced into giving her the divorce, then maybe she is not really divorced because he didn't really want to free her. And that is a very big problem, because if a woman is married to one man and has children with another man, these children are, pardon my French, bastards, mamzerim. That is not something anybody, even if you're totally not observant, nobody wants their children to be bastards. It's a stain for 10 generations. A bastard cannot marry a regular Jew, only another bastard. It is terrible, and we don't want to be in the blacklist. It is really terrible. So every woman who can still have children really wants to be freed from the man she's married to and will not free her. In the state of Israel, there is no way for civil divorce. You cannot undo a marriage. There's no legal way, not Jewish way, there's no legal way to get out of a marriage not through this process that I just described. It's the law of the land. It's not the law of the Torah. It's the law of the state. The state cannot free that woman even if the state really wants to, because it's the law. Even if you married in Cyprus, or in Vegas, or in Prague, if you are a Jewish couple and you registered as married in the state of Israel, you cannot get divorced otherwise. So women who are in the process of trying to obtain a get, trying to get a get, and their biological clock is ticking, and they are still fertile, and they want to have children, either need to get the get right away, and this could take 5, 10, 15 years, and it does, or need to preserve their fertility. And if we deeply care about a woman's womb and about the potential of having children here in Israel, which is probably what the parliament cares about, we want to help that woman. We want to put her through an agonizing process of extracting her eggs and freezing them. I will pay for that. We will pay for us. We will pay for that. And who will decide when she can use the eggs? The rabbinical court. That's the word of the bill, the law. The rabbinical court will tell us when she can use her own eggs and if she's free to become a mother. That is such a harmful law. And when I was calling members of Knesset to tell them, will you reconsider your support of this bill? I had a really tough time explaining what's wrong with this idea. This is why I'm saying, and this is where I'll end, that religion, or Jewish religion in Israel 2017, inherently, has a power structure that is against women. And that sometimes seems like it's benevolent, but the business is how to give us power, men and women, to change the structure.
Michael.
Friends, behind me and in front of you, there is a curtain. Behind the curtain is the Torah. A number of different scrolls we're privileged to have here in this synagogue. And when we're at prayer, the curtain is drawn back. The question that we face today, and the question that this country faces every day, is what should the nature of the separation between the Torah, for those of you visiting from other countries and other languages and religions, the scroll of the Pentateuch, the first books of the Hebrew Bible. What kind of separation should there be between the Torah and us? By the way, why do we use this curtain? Is it to protect the honor of the Torah from the diurnal, regular, menial, daily things we have to discuss? Or is it to protect us from the Torah, or at least those who speak in its name, who would use it to decide, we've just heard a stirring example, how we're meant to live our lives? There is an expression, the first person who, to the best of our knowledge, uses it is Nachmanides, one of the greatest medieval interpreters in Jewish Spain, Naval Bereshut HaTorah, which on your page, which you should have received, is translated as a scoundrel. Now, Bereshut HaTorah is a beautiful kind of ambivalence of the Hebrew language. A scoundrel in the service of Torah, a scoundrel in the reshut, in the area, in the domain of the Torah. When Nachmanides uses the expression, commenting on a verse from the book of Leviticus, he's referring to a particular situation. The Bible tells us it's okay to eat. You'll all be relieved to hear. The Bible tells us it's okay and encouraged to engage in sexual relations in the appropriate context. There are some people, says Nachmanides, who, having been given permission to eat by the Bible, do nothing but eat. There are some people who, having been permission to engage in appropriate, permitted sexual activities, do think of nothing else. That is, he says, Naval Bereshut HaTorah. When what you are doing is clearly understood by our moral compass to be unacceptable, but you can justify it in the narrow interpretation of Torah. In our context, in the contemporary state of Israel, where sovereignty has changed the equation in profound ways, Naval Bereshut HaTorah, acting as a scoundrel in the name of Torah, has a different connotation. It's not only, if you like, a narrow halachic pikayun discussion. It's what happens when we use our religious tradition to justify appalling acts. In 2015, the Church of the Multiplication, or the Church of the Loaves and Fishes, a Catholic church in Tabcha, in the Galilee, part of it was burnt down. It was burnt down by some of the individuals who, Tom Era was referring to some of them, the group to which they belong. These are Jews acting in the name of their understanding of Jewish tradition. And lest there be any doubt, they left a quotation on the wall. A quotation from one of the classic Jewish prayers, V'ha'elilim kalot yikaritun. And the idols shall surely be cut down. It's interesting to note that the great 15th century commentator Isaac Abarvanel uses this expression, which comes from an ancient prayer, and uses it to describe precisely what one ought to do as a good, faithful Jew in the land of Israel with regard to Christian holy sites. And what Abarbanel says makes shocking reading. It's here in front of you. On that day, he's referring to a verse from the 13th chapter of Zechariah. In that day, the holy name is said that he will cut off the names of the idols from the land. And if he didn't say this about the people of Israel alone, but rather about all the nations, that the idols will surely be cut off, and they will go up to the mountain of the Lord to learn Torah and true beliefs. This includes removing houses of idolatry from Jerusalem, which the uncircumcised, namely the Christians, have built, both where their Messiah is buried and on Mount Zion, just within a short walking distance from here. Everything will be completely cancelled out. In this way, Jerusalem will be an open source from which knowledge and the fear of God will go out to all humanity. The most remarkable combination of an inspiring universalistic vision and a call for direct action to remove these Christian sites. It is not inconceivable that the geniuses who burnt down the church in the Galilee were aware of this medieval interpretation and were saying, we finally have the capacity to fulfill the vision of our illustrious forebear. What are we to do as we live in a society in which not only modern fundamentalisms, as described so beautifully by Tomer, but ancient and medieval sources of our tradition are used in order to justify heinous acts? How are we to respond? I offer you one possible example of how one might respond. One appreciates, of course, that you could be tempted to say, let's remove religion from the discussion altogether. Right? How many conversations have you been involved in which somebody inevitably says, oh, religion has been the cause of so much terrible, why couldn't we just, somebody at one point starts whistling a tune by John Lennon, and you end up saying, if we could just remove religion from the equation. The example I want to provide is that of Abraham Joshua Heschel, a man who died in 1972, Polish-born, lived in Germany, left, went back to Poland, and then came to the United States, where he lived until his death in 1972. Heschel offers us a different approach to this thorny question. He stakes his basic beliefs clearly in the first quote you have in front of you. We must not regard any human institution or object as being an end in itself. Man's achievements in this world are but attempts, and a temple that comes to mean more than a reminder of the living God is an abomination. A temple, an institution, a mindset, an ideology that comes to mean more than the image of God is idolatry, is an abomination. In 1963, Heschel attended the first conference on religion and race in Chicago, where he made the acquaintance of Martin Luther King Jr., who was to be a close ally until King's assassination. In this speech, canonical now in contemporary Jewish circles, here are some excerpts. Religion and race. How can the two be uttered together? To act in the spirit of religion is to unite what lies apart. To remember that humanity as a whole is God's beloved child. To act in the spirit of race is to sunder, to slash, to dismember the flesh of living humanity. Racism is worse than idolatry. Racism is Satanism, unmitigated evil. You cannot worship God and at the same time look at man as if he were a horse. All prophecy, writes Heschel, is one great exclamation. God is not indifferent to evil. He is always concerned. He is personally affected by what man does to man. He is a God of pathos, not some abstract philosophical God, but a God who responds, a God who goes into exile when we go into exile, who weeps at the sight of human suffering. Our tragedy, he says, begins with the segregation of God, with the bifurcation of the secular and the sacred, with keeping a thick curtain between the Torah and ourselves. That's me, that's not him, I'm adding those words. We worry more about the purity of dogma than about the integrity of love. Now, what would Heschel have to say to the claim, I've got quotes, I've got verses, I've got sources. Abarbanel tells me that I should go off and destroy the church. Heschel espoused a view, which he based in the Jewish mystical tradition, according to which the reality, the truth of God's word, becomes apparent to humanity over time. One of his most famous books, which he wrote in Hebrew, was entitled Torah min hashamayim ba'aspaklaria shel hadorot, Heavenly Torah as refracted through the prism of the generations. Truth is not one univocal, one-dimensional commodity which you purchase and then you use for the rest of your life. Rather, he uses metaphors of like a precious stone through which light is refracted. And different dimensions and possibilities become true in different eras and eons. That's why he writes in a famous essay on interreligious relations called No Religion is an Island, perhaps it is the will of God that in this eon there should be diversity in our forms of devotion and commitment to God. In this eon, diversity of religions is the will of God. Heschel is aware of the fact that in this eon, that may be true. But what was the era of Abarbanel? Abarbanel, born in Portugal, lives in Spain, experiences the expulsion, dies in Venice. He is constantly involved in a polemical attempt to defend the cause of Judaism. It is an absurdity for Abarbanel to consider taking a ship to the land of Israel and burning down a church. He is relating to the reality he sees in the political context of his time. And Heschel, I want to suggest, would have us consider what it means to be part of a tradition. That is not to go back to a selective reading of verses which allow us to indulge our basest instincts. It is rather to see ourselves as being part of an unfolding process in which we have to do the work of finding out what the truth of today might be. Tomer showed us how some of the modern thinkers of modern Zionism, ultra-religious Zionism, are doing this. And we have to ask ourselves the question, are we to eschew this process and leave it to them? Or are we to be part of the process of saying, Torah commands us to behave in a certain way in this era based on our deepest instincts and religious intuition? Heschel was asked in an interview in '68 what he thought about the interpretation of verses in the book of Genesis. How am I doing for time? Nearly done? 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Lots of time. He was asked what does one do with the verses in the book of Genesis to do with ham, not pig meat. It's all very complicated. I'm not talking about what Ham is a person, right? Ham, Shem, Ham, Yaveh, the sons of Noah, etc. There's a way of interpreting those verses which has provided a basis for race hatred. He writes, he said, I'm sorry to say that religious people count among themselves a great many idiots. And a great many people who don't know how to read the Bible, and instead of using the Bible as a text, they use it as a pretext. A religious sensitivity considers this injustice the injustice of racial discrimination, a profound personal issue. an issue with which his own salvation and future is tied up. It's not a problem among other problems. It's not a matter of doing justice to a person who happens to be black. It is justice to one's own destiny. It is the most vital issue conceivable. It's not a social issue. It's a profoundly private, intimately personal issue. That's why, he argues somewhat apologetically, there are so many people of religious motivation who are so active in the civil rights struggle, and so it continues. Heschel was asked in the last interview he gave, shortly before his death, what his response was to the jurors in a famous trial, the Berrigan trial of some activist Catholic priest with whom he was very associated, who had said that people who espouse religion should not meddle in politics. He said, yeah, that's a brilliant comment, he said. If the prophets were alive, Michael Lapsley said something rather similar to us last night. If the prophets were alive, they would already be sent to jail by these jurors. Because the prophets mixed into social, political issues. And frankly, he was emboldened at this point, I would say that God seems to be a non-religious person. Because if you read the words of God in the Bible, he always mixes in politics and in social issues. Heschel offers us by the way, it's highly problematic. If you believe that you should use your religious intuitions to try to intuit what Torah should have to say in our new reality, we have to embrace the possibility that other people with radically different instincts will do something similar and come up with radically different conclusions. It's a dangerous game. Heschel was convinced it's the game we have to play. We have to stake our claim to be part of Torah and to ensure that the curtain separating us from it is a permeable one. That there may need to be boundaries, that I don't want legislation based on the most benighted halakhic worldviews. But I refuse to have a lead curtain separating me from my tradition. Last month there was a fascinating debate, with this I will end, between two leading rabbis. It begins with a conservative rabbi in Los Angeles who wrote a little article saying that rabbis should not indulge in party political activities. This is David Wolpe in LA. I didn't bring the quotes, but he says, you know, really do we need to be talking about Pence from the pulpit? We should be talking about Moses. This position was attacked by a number of people, amongst them by Rick Jacobs. It's informative, I just say this in a sidebar. David Wolpe is a congregational rabbi. He is exposed to huge pressures in his own congregation from people who espouse a range of political views. Rick Jacobs isn't a congregational rabbi. Abraham Joshua Heschel wasn't either. They take a kind of broader institutional, or in Heschel's case, a prophetic view. Here is how Rick Jacobs countered David Wolpe's suggestion that we shouldn't meddle in politics. The Judaism that I believe in does not limit Torah lessons to the parchment of our Sifrei Torah, the Torah scrolls, just behind us here, nor to the tables around which we convene for communal Torah study. The Judaism that I live compels me to use those lessons to understand the most urgent challenges we face. Now more than ever, with millions of refugees suffering the crushing burden of wars and dislocation, the planet on the verge of confronting the irreversible, devastating consequences of climate change. Muslim and Jewish Americans fearful in the face of escalating hate crimes, and millions at risk of losing life-saving healthcare access. Rabbis cannot, nor should not, abdicate the call of the prophets and the teachings of the rabbis by standing idly by the blood of our neighbor. My attempt in these minutes is to bring to the fore a question. Is the way we respond to the kind of dangers we've heard about when Torah is deployed in the name of benighted agendas, is the appropriate response to build thicker curtains between us and Torah, or to find different ways in which Torah and the people who search for it, the way in which we interact and interrelate.
Neo-fascistic ideas mixed with a sovereign state, and Shira also reminding us when the dangers of when patriarchy is state-sanctioned. And I want to thank also Michael Murmer for reminding us of the dangers of the misuse and abuse of Torah lessons, but also the promise of Torah as well. And I know each member of this panel also fights every day for the promise of Torah, not just the dangers of we face in Israel and the South.